did. 1916 Name £605,569 Brazil Great Southern £341,000 Brazil Northeastern $57,835,200 Brazil Railways, 5 classes, 20. Pound 4,187,650 Great Western of Brazil, 4 classes pound 15,893,429 Leopoldina, 6 classes pound 2,600,000 Madeira Mamor 4 million pounds Mogiana Sul Mineira 100,000 pounds Quarahim International Bridge 6 million pounds São Paulo, to Santos, pound 3,175,000 Sorocabana 900,000 pounds Southern São Paulo Public Utilities pound 1,154,700 Port of Para 115,800 pounds Cantareira Water Company, São Paulo, pound 1,321,900 City of Santos Improvements, 4 classes pound 2,003,000 City of São Paulo Improvements pound 1,200,000 Manaus Harbour and Manaus Improvements 349,000 pounds Para Improvements pound 1,761,875 Rio de Janeiro City Improvements, 4 classes pound 1,423,400 Central Bahia Railway Trust, A&B 275,000 pounds São Paulo Gas, 2 classes pound 2,571,871 Rio Claro RY. And investment, 2 classes £527,800 Amazon Telegraph, 2 classes £91,000 Pernambuco Waterworks, 2 classes £596,000 Manaus Tramways pound 1,384,449 Para Electric, 4 classes $110,361,400 Brazilian Traction, Light and Power, 2 classes $1,400,000 Jardim Botanico Tramways $28,013,500 Rio de Janeiro Tramways, Light and Power, 2 classes $6,821,917 São Paulo Tramways, Light and Power, 2 classes $2 million São Paulo Electric. The 5 last mentioned companies are registered in Canada, and the securities are thus issued in dollars, although the stock was largely held in Great Britain and Canada prior to the European War. Industrial companies pound 1,182,400 Dumont Coffee Estates, 3 classes £120,000 São Paulo Coffee Estates £150,000 Agua Santa Coffee Company £646,265 Juan del Rey Mining £643,601 Rio de Janeiro Flour Mills £100,154 North Brazilian Sugar £100,000 Mappin and Webb, Rio and São Paulo, £850,000 Brazilian Warrant Company. At the same time, the British share in the total foreign debts of the federal, state and municipal governments are estimated at about £150 million out of aggregate obligations of some £180 million. These debts are treated in more detail on another page. There are very many enterprises carried on with British capital which do not figure upon the stock exchange, or are branches of businesses which do not differentiate the capital employed in Brazil. Included in one or other of these classes are the shoe factories belonging to Clark, Glasgow, in São Paulo, the cotton spinning mills of Coates, also heir of Scotch skill, several cotton cloth mills, as the Carioca in Rio, and others in Petropolis and Campos, sugar factories in Pernambuco, etc. Included also in money investments should be counted the £8.5 million of paid-up capital of the three British banks, the British Bank of South America, the London and Brazilian and the London and River Plate, which total with their branches to 24 establishments. It is impossible to say what part of the huge shipping investment serving Brazil should be included, but it is a highly important element and quite the greatest developing factor in Brazilian commerce. The Royal Mail is the great popular passenger and freight line, while Lamport and Holt, Booth, Harrison, the Prince, Johnson, and other smaller lines do a big Brazilian business. Among firms doing energetic work and with large capital invested are the two great coal firms, Wilson's and Corey's, with their depots for Welsh coal, their fleets of lighters, repair equipment, salvage departments and stevedoring. Old established commercial firms such as Stevenson's and Dudas in Bahia, chiefly occupied with cacao export. The latter, in addition to other activities, maintains a fleet of modern whaling boats, and a factory for refining whale oil. There are the dry goods stores of Sloper's series, the New House of Mappin, the Brack firm in Pernambuco. All these and a score of other classes are not only commercial developers but in a greater or smaller degree employers of Brazilian labor. There are British cattle breeders, sugar and cotton growers, owners of coffee and cacao estates, operators of iron works, foundries, schools, bookshops, oil depots, and many other enterprises. The total British investment of money in Brazil cannot be under £300 million. The external debts of the Brazilian states and municipalities have varied very little since 1913-14. Loans became difficult to obtain from the beginning of Balkan troubles, while since the outbreak of the Great European War there have been no additions to cash advances, and in only a few cases has there been substantial reduction of debts. On the contrary, most debtor states and cities found it necessary to make funding arrangements by which specie payments were suspended for a number of years, measures which gave temporary relief, but seriously increase the amount of money to be paid annually when the funding period comes to an end. Certain states, as São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Paraná, paid up until the autumn of 1917, Espírito Santo, and the Federal District, have made gallant efforts to avoid piling up debt in this way, and by severe economy have continued to pay interest on their foreign obligations. The sacrifice has not been small, for with depressed exchange it has taken an unusually large number of paper mill race to buy sterling, and at a time when it has not been easy to collect even paper revenues. The effort is all the more creditable. With the worst part of the 1921 crisis past, state finances have been materially eased by calls for Brazilian products at enhanced prices, and there is a perceptible restoration of confidence at the end of 1922. In some districts the post-war boom proved an undisguised blessing, bringing profits that could not have been looked for under normal conditions. Coffee, hides, rubber, cacao, frozen meat, sugar and manganese have all brought stimulated prices, and many home industries, such as coal mining and cotton spinning and weaving, have been greatly encouraged. In round numbers, the external debts of the separate states of the Brazilian Union appear to amount to about £47 million, with the municipalities adding another £12 or £13 million. The British interest in these loans is largely dominant, but important sums of French money have also been invested. Brazil's direct debt to France includes £10,400,000,043 loans with which the Bahia, Goiás, and Corumbá railways were constructed. There are also state debts, that of the state of Para being held by Mayer Frères of Paris, while the Société Marseillaise holds the bonds of the big Amazonas debt. Part of São Paulo's debt is owed to the Société Générale, and the state of Espírito Santo owes nearly £2 million to the Banque Française Italienne, as well as large sums about which a dispute rages, advanced by the French Hypothecary Bank established at the port of Victoria. There is a good deal of French money sunk in the Madeira-Mamor Railway, one of the Farquhar undertakings which cost the equivalent of more than £6 million sterling, 1,500 livres, is said to need much reconstruction already, opened to traffic in 1912, and does no more than pay its way. French bondholders also hold part of Minas Gerais debt, and of that of Rio de Janeiro. French engineers, operating with French money, built several of the existing railways, notably the Auxiliaire de Chemins de Fer or Brazil with 1,400 miles of track. It was a French firm, the Compagnie Française de Rio Grande do Sul, formed in Paris in 1906. Which put 150 million francs into the port works of that southerly city, opened to shipping in November 1916. French companies also began the port works of Pernambuco, checked by money paralysis after 1914, and constructed the new harbour facilities of Bahia. When the much-discussed Miss Dalbordin came to Brazil in 1915, it was with the object of investigating the condition of the properties in which French money was concerned, and the chief member of the party was also credited with an effort to induce the Brazilian government to guarantee the rather clouded state obligations to French bondholders. German investment in Brazil is, as regards money, not of great importance. It is largely confined to the loans made by the Dresdner Bank, and to capital expenditures in the southern states, including the construction there of a couple of small railways. There has, however, been great investment of blood and energy. There are many strong German commercial houses and retail stores in all districts, and to Germany was due the first granting of long and easy credit facilities to Brazil. Germans have been largely interested in the coffee and rubber businesses. The Brasilianische Bank für Deutschland operates with a capital of 15 million marks, and the Banco Alemão Transatlantico is another strong German financial house. This summing up of European investment in Brazil, incomplete as it is, serves to demonstrate the extent to which Brazil has been opened up by Europeans. The European has asked for Brazilian raw products, brought ships to carry them, built ports for the ships to lie in and railroads to freight the products to the ports, has sold manufactured goods and lent Brazil the money with which to pay for them, and established banks for financial operations connected with the business created. Millions of hardy and industrious people have gone to live in Brazil and to bring the land into cultivation, to educate their children as Brazilians and help in the mental progress of the country. When, therefore, some of the less thoughtful journals of the United States turned their eyes towards South America at the outbreak of the European War and protested loudly that this country was not getting her share of commerce, it was rather as if the cuckoo complained that she was not getting her share of the robin's nest. To accuse Europe of monopolizing Brazilian trade is like accusing water of monopolizing the river. Brazil, in fact, like the whole of the Americas, had no trade until Europe created it by calls for natural products, supply of transportation means, and loans of money for development work. Today the situation is changed. It was inevitably changing as North America herself became during the last 50 years herself a caller for raw products, and began to take great quantities of Brazilian coffee and rubber, drugs and hides. Her sales to Brazil, despite the drawback of the shipping triangle, have been increasing for some time along certain highly specialized lines. But sales and purchases are not sufficient to create a permanent link between countries, especially when conducted through the medium of a third person as freighter and banker. The European War brought about, as no other awakening process perhaps could have done, a realization of the new duty of the United States to South America. It is part of her inheritance from Europe. It is the work that lies to her hand, if she will do it. There is no one better fitted at the present time. If she will not, she loses an extraordinary chance for both service and profit. She must not think only of buying and selling. And when she is occupied with this trading, she must remember that to her as to South America, sales of North American goods are less important than purchases of South American raw materials. It would not matter very much to the United States if she did not sell anything to Brazil. The probability is that more money has been spent on making sales, so far, than the profits amount to. What does matter is that North American manufacturers should continue to be supplied in vast and increasing quantities with South American hides for the use of leather manufactories, with ivory nuts for the button industry, with the coffee that cannot be grown in northern climes, with rubber and fibers and tannin materials, and with the minerals that exist in the sands and rocks of South America in unexampled variety and which can be there produced at half the cost that North America is forced to pay for labor. Apart from trading, there is a great need for more investment in Brazil, for more opening of great spaces, planting of fields, lumbering, road building, mining, cattle raising. There is space for 20 million people in the cool temperate zones alone, excluding tropical areas. Is the United States ready to take up the task which Brazil cannot perform alone, however seriously she attacks her problems? Is she prepared to devote to this work blood, brains and money? Entry of North American interests into Brazil has been steadily increasing for the last 10 years, and was hastened after the outbreak of the European War. There has been noticeable since then much more energy on the part of individuals and small firms. Before 1914, the bulk of United States work done in Brazil was part of the international campaign of such big firms as Standard Oil or the Singer Sewing Machine Company. Oil has its rivals in other companies, also with depots on the coast, but the Singer machine has almost a South American monopoly. Locomotives, cars, elevators, most of the typewriters, electrical equipment, and quantities of agricultural machinery are sold by American houses with branches in Brazil. Agricultural, printing and shoe machinery of United States origin also seems to make good sales. In 1915, the National City Bank of New York opened branches in Santos, Rio and São Paulo. The United States Steel Corporation started a line of freight steamers, and was followed by a number of new lines. The two great light and power companies of Rio and São Paulo are Canadian, but some of the capital, equipment and personnel are from the U.S. One of the two existing packing houses is Chicagoan in capital, equipment and personnel. Several of the allied enterprises of the Brazil Railways Company are American managed and equipped, as the lumber mills at Tasbarras and the cattle company, as well as part of the transportation lines. The Brazil Railways is the largest American registered company in Brazil, but is rather an example of how not to do things in South America, for although a few interests, as those cited above, are doing well, the company as a whole is in the hands of a receiver. The time is probably past when money could be obtained in Europe by persons registering a company in a second country to spend it in a third, and what is most needed now is continued and genuine development work actually financed from North America. Most of the United States firms with agencies in Brazil are sellers, but among the purchasers are several coffee importing houses and, with the eclipse of German traders, the greatest rubber dealers, while the past year has seen American agents coming to Brazil to increase takings of manganese, precious stones and hides. The state debts, the figures given below are in round numbers only, and are without the additions which the funding loans entail. All sums are in pounds sterling. State external debt Alagoas £500,000, Amazonas 3 million, Bahia 3,875,000, Ceará 600,000, Espírito Santo 1,160,000, Maranhão 720,000, Minas Gerais 6,800,000, Pará 2,040,000, Paraná 2,200,000, Pernambuco 2,370,000, Rio de Janeiro 3 million, Rio Grande do Norte 350,000, Santa Catarina 220,000, São Paulo 20,350,000, the states of Goiás, Mato Grosso, Paraíba, Piauí, Rio Grande do Sul and Sergipe have no external debts. The funding loan arranged by the state of Para adds another £1,070,000 to her debt. The funding loan of Minas Gerais adds £600,000 and that of Amazonas, £850,000. The external debts of Brazilian municipalities, also borrowers from Europe, are about as follows, round numbers again being used. Federal District of Rio de Janeiro £4,395,000 Manaus, Amazonas, 214,000 Belém do Pará 750,000 plus funding loan 88,500 Recife, Pernambuco, 400,000 Bahia 2 million São Paulo 750,000 Santos 1 million plus funding loan 118,000 other municipalities in São Paulo state 685,000 Porto Alegre, Rio Grande do Sul, 600,000 Pelotas, Rio Grande do Sul, 600,000 Belo Horizonte, 216,000 federal debts on the outbreak of war in Europe in August 1914. The foreign debts of the federal government of the United States of Brazil amounted to something over £102 million. President Wenceslao Braz inherited obligations which had been enhanced by about £30 million during the previous four-year regime of Mary Chao Hermes de Fonseca. Brazil's reputation as a good world customer had long permitted her to borrow freely, often paying old debts or interest with new loans, and piling up deficits as the most facile solution of economic complications. The world shock of 1914 brought exchange down with Iran, and, although it recovered from the first fall, it was soon evident that Brazilian credit could not bring it back to its old level, and that the financial burden of the country, its obligation to pay foreign debts, would be rendered still more onerous by this depression. It would take just so many more mill race, with federal receipts perilously lessened by the stoppage of imports, to buy pounds sterling, than in normal times. Brazil asked her foreign creditors for relief, obtained a funding loan by which payments on interest and amortization were suspended until October 1917. As the specie payments called for by the foreign debt would have needed about £5,200,000 in both 1915 and 1916, a burden was lightened, for the time, which the increased balances of trade during the intervening period have also helped to lift. But between 1914 and 1918 the foreign debt was increased by nearly £12 million of accumulated interest, and the sums required for annual service were more difficult to find after the depreciation of the mill race in 1920. In 1920 the total nominal foreign debt was £120,400,000, plus 325 million francs. Later, Brazil borrowed a few millions from the United States, and in early 1922 again borrowed successfully in London. The internal debt, at the beginning of 1921, amounted to over 1 million contos. It will be seen from the following list that while nearly £12 million came from France, yet the great bulk of the borrowed sums came from England originally. A considerable proportion of the original sums, apparently about 40%, were destined to the construction or acquisition of railways and port works in the Republic. Brazil's external sterling debt. The 31st of December, 1920 sterling loan. £SD 1883 4,599,600 1888 6,297,300 1889 19,837,000 1895 7,442,000 1898, funding, 8,613,717 1901, rescission, 16,619,320 1903, port works, Rio de Janeiro, 8,500,000 1908 4,000 1910 10,000 1911, port works, Rio de Janeiro, 4,500,000 000 railways, 1911 2,400,000 00 Lloyd Brasileiro, 1906–1911 2,100,000 00 loan, 1913 11 million 00 1914, funding, 14,502,396 total nominal 120,411,334. 00 franc debt 1908–1909, loan for the construction of the Itapura to Corumba Railway 100 million 1909, loan for the port works at Pernambuco 40 million 1910, loan for the construction of the Goiás Railway 100 million 1911. Loan for the construction of the Via Calbahiana network of railways 60 million 1916, Goiás Railway loan, responsibility for which was assumed by the government by Decree No. 12,183 of 30 August 1916 25,000,000 total nominal 325 million francs. This would be an exceedingly heavy debt if Brazil were an old, exploited, filled-up country with no spare lands and her natural resources tapped. Brazil's reason for hopefulness lies in her youth, the vast undeveloped land and mineral resources of her patrimony, her good credit among the nations, and the sincerity with which her statesmen are attacking the task of resuming interest payments. Brazil has a big income, but it needs to be increased before she can pay her debts without a strain. The President has repeatedly declared his firm intention to sustain payments at whatever sacrifice, and has recently called the states into conference with a view to devising new methods of raising revenue. In the budget estimates of the federal government for 1921, revenue was reckoned at 102,000 contos gold, mill race equals 27 pence, and 624,761 contos paper, probably a fraction over 12 pence, Expenditure at the same time was calculated at 75,680 gold and 711,640 paper contos, including in the gold payments the service of the foreign debt. The federal government's chief revenues are derived from import taxes, impartially placed upon entries into all the states. Income of the states is mainly derived from export dues, while municipalities get revenues from imposts upon professions and industries, and manage sometimes to get a share in export dues. The Acre Territory, purchased by the Brazilian government from Bolivia in 1903, is the only part of Brazil paying export as well as import dues to the federal authorities, this contribution coming from rubber. To help raise new revenues, impostos do consumo, excise, have been increased on articles consumed in the country, the addition to the burden of the retailer and the consumer himself raising some outcry, as has also the suggestion to put on railway freight imposts. The states, exporting larger quantities of goods than normally, are not so badly placed as the federal government, but that they look upon the matter of raising income from produce exported with different eyes in different parts of the Republic is shown by a look at some of the export tax figures for 1922. These figures are not constant, as the porter is frequently changed by the officials of exporting points in response to conditions in international markets. Coffee, the premier export of Brazil, pays to São Paulo an export tax of 9%, plus 5 francs a bag for valorization service. In Minas it pays 8.5, plus 5 francs a bag, used for administrative purposes. Bahia coffee pays 10% of its value, Pernambuco 4.8%. Paraná 30%, Santa Catarina 8%, Espírito Santo 12.5%. Cacao pays in Bahia 14% of its value, in Amazonas 5%, in Pará 5%, in Maranhão 4%. Fishing boats of North Brazil. Rocks at Guarulhos, near Santos. Bertioga, the old entrance to Santos. Cantareira water supply, São Paulo. Sugar pays in Pernambuco, the principal producing state, 8%, with additional charges bringing this to nearly 10% for interstate, and 12% for foreign exports. In Bahia, 4%, Alagoas, 7.8%, Paraná, 4.4%. Rio sugar pays 2.5% to the state and 2% to the municipality of Campos. Rubber pays 15% of its value in Amazonas, or half of the amount paid in the palmy days of the industry. Pará charges 18%, the acre, 6%, Mato Grosso, 10%. Cotton pays 11% in Pernambuco, nearly 12% in Alagoas, 8% in Bahia. Hides pay 20% in Amazonas, Maranhão, 2 cents a kilo, Pernambuco, 18%, Alagoas, 13%, Bahia, 15%, Paraná, and Santa Catarina, 10%, Rio Grande do Sul, 10.5%, Mato Grosso, 6%. Tobacco pays a variety of dues, ranging from 12% in Bahia, the chief exporting point, to 4% in Pernambuco and the southern states. MAT pays 3.6 in Rio Grande, 46 reais a kilo in Paraná and 20 reais a kilo in Santa Catarina. Frozen meat, a new industry, escaped taxation until September 1916, when Rio put on a tax of about 1/100th of an American cent per pound, a delicately weighted burden, which a vigorous industry can stand perfectly well if it is not multiplied too much. Principal banks in Brazil. Certain strong banks, as the three of British origin, London and Brazilian, London and River Plate, and the British Bank of South America, have branches or agencies at several places, the two first possessing establishments in every important town. The National City Bank of New York has 3 Brazilian branches, Santos, Rio and São Paulo. The French-Italian Bank Française Italienne and the French Credit Foncia have several branches besides the establishments in Rio and São Paulo, as also have the German Banco Alemão Transatlântico, Brasilianische Bank für Deutschland, and the Sudamericanische, the Spanish Banco Espanhol del Rio de la Plata, and the Portuguese Banco Nacional Ultramarino, and the Italian-Belgian Italo-Belge. The Banco do Brasil is the strongest Brazilian bank, with headquarters in Rio and many branches. In addition to the houses spreading all over Brazil, each state has its own banking firms established in the capital. In banking power, the federal capital, Rio de Janeiro, stands first, with a capital of nearly 46,000 contos of reais. São Paulo is next, with banking capital of over 13,000 contos. Rio Grande do Sul comes third, with over 11,000 contos, Minas Gerais following, succeeded by Bahia and Pernambuco, Pará and Amazonas. The chief banks of Rio, in addition to the 3 British, 1 American, and other foreign banks above mentioned, as well as the Banco do Brasil, are the Banco Comercial do Rio de Janeiro, the Banco do Comércio, Banco do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, Mercantil do Rio de Janeiro, and the Lavra e Comércio do Brasil. São Paulo, besides the foreign establishments, has the Commercial do Estado de São Paulo, Banco do Comércio e Indústria de São Paulo, Banco de São Paulo, Banco de Crédito Hipotecario e Agrícola do Estado de São Paulo, the Banco de Construções e Reservas, and the União de São Paulo. Among the local banks doing excellent service are the Hipotecario e Agrícola do Estado de Minas Gerais, headquarters in Belo Horizonte, the Província do Rio Grande do Sul, Banco do Porto Alegre, the Banco do Recife, Pernambuco, the Commercial do Pará, Crédito Hipotecario e Agrícola do Estado da Bahia, Banco do Ceará, Banco do Maranhão, but many other places also have comparatively small banks, and in addition there are many private casas bancárias, financial houses, strongly entrenched, doing sound and useful work. Chapter 7: The world's horticultural and medicinal debt to Brazil. Loudon, the English Horticultural Authority, says in his Encyclopedia of Gardening, 1835, that some of the finest flowers of British gardens are natives of South America, especially annuals. He mentions the dahlia, by the obsolete name of Georgina, the marvel of Peru, Mirabilia, the calceolaria and the schizanthus, adding that beautiful shrubs are not less numerous, but they are generally inmates of greenhouses. Since Loudon wrote, Brazil, as other parts of South and Central America, has been the happy hunting ground of plant explorers, and the gardens of Europe and North America have been beautified to an extent of which that devoted horticulturist never dreamed. The tale of the indebtedness of the gardens of less fortunate climes to South America in general and Brazil in particular for plants and shrubs, both ornamental and of economic value, would occupy a large volume. The extent of the debt is no less great than general ignorance of it. Practically nothing is known of early attempts to introduce Brazilian plants, for they were failures, and failures they remained for 2.5 centuries after South America was discovered. The science of botany and art of gardening were alike in primitive stages until the latter part of the 18th century, and, whilst South American plants were known by their local names, means for their successful transportation had not been found, nor, in the rare cases of their surviving long journeys by sailing boat, was successful cultivation of these exotics known. If, as is possible, there are yet in herbariums in Portugal any plants which the early colonists sent home, no printed record of them seems to exist. It was not until the second decade of the 19th century that any serious attempts were made to reveal to the world the richness of Brazilian flora, and only within recent years that anything like a comprehensive account of it has been published. As far back as 1648 Willem Piso and Georg Markgraaf published in Amsterdam a large folio volume containing spirited woodcuts carefully colored by hand of Brazilian flowers, shrubs, fishes, birds, reptiles, etc., but this was a natural history rather than a botanical book. Both these pioneers are commemorated in Pisonia and Markgravia, species of which are still in cultivation. In 1823 scientific works dealing with Brazilian flora appeared. Micans Delectus Flori, Brasiliensis was issued in Vienna. The ISDI Alcune Specie new of del Brasil and his Quarant Piante new of de Brasil, were issued in quarto volumes in Modena. 4 years later Saint Hilaire published in Paris his Histoire des plants of Brazil and Paraguay. Between 1827 and 1831 J. Paul's Plantarum Brasiliae Cons appeared in 2 folio volumes in Vienna. Other floras of Brazil, notably that of Martius, 1837–40, came out at intervals, and by the end of the century the plant life of Brazil was well covered by scientific publications. So far as Great Britain is concerned, and it may be taken as a criterion of Europe generally, the most comprehensive record of sources and dates of the introduction of South American plants is Loudon's Hortus Britannicus, first published in 1830. It enumerates something like 30,000 species, exotic and otherwise. As the importation of South American plants was only in its infancy at that time, many hundreds of flowers, now familiar in gardens and hot houses, are not recorded, but the book is reasonably complete up to the time of publication. Most of the more important introduced aliens, before and after the date of Loudon's great work, may be found described and illustrated in the Botanical Magazine of London, issued monthly from 1787 to the present time, while others are dealt with in Loddige's Botanical Cabinet, 1824, and in many other of the quantity of horticultural publications appearing in Europe during the first half of the 19th century, notably in Nicholson's Dictionary of Gardening and in the revised edition of Johnson's Gardener's Dictionary, bringing the record to the end of the 19th century. Whilst many European botanists, such as Langsdorff, Burchell, Olszewski and others had, during the earlier decades of the 19th century, explored certain parts of Brazil, nothing was of more importance to general knowledge of the plant treasures of the country than the work accomplished by a Scotch botanist, Dr. George Gardner, afterwards superintendent of the Botanical Gardens of Ceylon. His travels in the interior of Brazil during 1836–41 is a record of high merit, not only on account of its contribution to Brazilian botany and natural history, but because it is a faithful and genial picture of life and conditions in the interior of Brazil 3/4 of a century ago. The amazing richness and beauty of Brazilian flora had never before been revealed to Europeans as through Gardner's book and his collections of thousands of specimens. It is extraordinary that these fascinating travels should have remained out of print. Of all the groups of plants introduced to the rest of the world from the southerly countries of the New World, orchids easily rank first, as the most precious, the most varied and beautiful, and the most costly. The first brought to England came from the East and West Indies. Epidendrum cochleatum found its way from Jamaica to England and was flowered for the first time in 1787. Another species of the same lovely family, Epidendrum fragrans, came also from Jamaica in 1778 but was not flowered until 1788. In 1794 15 species of epiphytal orchids were at Kew, chiefly brought from the West Indies by Admiral Bligh, and for many years these islands, and India, were the main sources of orchid importation. But in 1793 a species of Oncidium was introduced to England from Panama, in 1811 another came from Montevideo, and by 1818 Brazil had begun to contribute species of the same genus. In 1825 Loddiges of Hackney, London, had in cultivation some 84 species of orchids from South America and the East, and by 1830 the Royal Horticultural Society of London had collectors in various parts of Brazil, hunting for rare plants. Many beautiful orchids were sent home by businessmen residing in South America, for instance, William Cattley of Barnet, who died in 1832, and whose name is commemorated by the noble Cattleyar, established an extensive correspondence with businessmen living abroad for the purposes of obtaining new and rare orchids, and through his efforts came many fine specimens, chiefly from Brazil. The earliest Brazilian Cattleyar to reach Europe was C. Loddiges Ye, 1815, but the most famous and most protean species of all C. cabiata, reached Europe in 1818, and others of the same genus came in rapid succession from Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica, Guatemala and the Argentine. Many beautiful Brazilian orchids were sent by William Harrison, a merchant living in Rio de Janeiro during the 30s and 40s of last century, to his brother Richard in Liverpool, whose residence at Aigburth was in those days a mecca to which orchid lovers paid annual pilgrimages. To introduce these plants was one thing, to cultivate them successfully was quite another. Hooker once declared that for more than half a century England was the grave of tropical orchids and that those surviving did so in spite of, rather than on account of, the treatment they received. Each grower had his special system, mostly wrong. It was not until after repeated and costly failures that orchid importing and growing became a success, and that success only became general about 1850. The debt of other countries to Brazil and indeed all tropical America for ferns and cacti is also great. The canna and its ally marcanthur may be traced in England as far back as 1730, the begonias and the gesnera date from 1816–18, whilst the favourite abutilon, introduced in 1837, is today hardy in many parts of Europe. The Gloxinia, arriving from South America a century earlier, has developed possibilities undreamt of by earlier horticulturists, and the same may be said of the fuchsia, brought from Mexico and Chile, 1823–25. The most popular South American shrub is the Escallonia macrantha, introduced from the island of Chilo, Alexander Selkirk's retreat, in 1848. It has for many years been a favourite hedge plant in the county of Cornwall, where it thrives in pink profusion. On the Madeira River, Amazonas, rapids at Tazermaos. Victoria regia lilies near Manaus. The Calceolaria is another early 19th century alien from South America, so too is the dahlia. 60 years ago whole nurseries were given over to the culture and hybridization of this flower, and an entire literature appeared on the subject. Its popularity has somewhat waned, but on the other hand the most gorgeous of greenhouse climbers, Bignonia, was never more treasured than it is today. Brazil, and other adjacent countries, has given us also many species of such genera as Achaemens, Alstroemeria, Anthurium, Aristolochia, Caladium, Calathea, Hibiscus, Ipomoea, the evening primrose, and hundreds of other beautiful plants. Among plants introduced and cultivated abroad for other reasons than their loveliness are the pineapple, Ananas sativa, which reached Europe as early as 1690. Coconuts were carried from Brazil a century ago, and the Brazil nut, Bertholletia excelsa, which was probably first taken to Portugal by very early navigators, finds its first mention in England in the 1830 edition of Lindley's Natural System of Botany. He speaks of the swari, or Brazil nuts of the shop, the kernel of which is one of the most delicious fruits of the nut kind. Brazil's gifts to the pharmacopoeias of the world have also been very valuable. Discovery, or rather publication in Europe of the medicinal properties of many Brazilian plants is due to Piso, author with Mark Grave, in Jaboranditka, of the work De Medicina Brasiliense, etc., of 1648, already mentioned. This monumental publication was undertaken under the patronage of Count John Maurice of Nassau, governor of North Brazil during the period of Dutch occupation, a far-seeing man whose portraits are to be seen in the public galleries of Amsterdam and Brussels. Nearly all the Brazilian plants with notable medicinal properties are fully described and illustrated in this book. Among them, and perhaps the best known, is ipecacuanha, obtained from the root of Cephalus ipecacuanha, native to the damp shady forests of Brazil. This drug was first mentioned in an account of Brazil given by a Portuguese friar in Purchas's Pilgrims, 1625, where it is called ipecaia, so that it is clear that Piso, although the first to bring the drug to the notice of European medical men, was not the discoverer of its qualities. In England, the famous physician John Pesce was the first savant to bring ipecacuanha to general notice in his observations made upon the Brazilian root called ipecacuanha, issued in 1682. A few years later it was firmly established in European medicine. In 1686, says A. C. Wooten, Chronicles of Pharmacy, 1910, Louis XIV bought from Jean Adrian Helvetius the secret of a medicine with which a number of remarkable cures had been performed. Helvetius, whose patronymic was Schweitzer, was the son of a Dutch quack, and he not only made his own fortune out of ipecacuanha, the royal gift alone was 1,000 louis d'or, but got the appointment of Inspector General of the hospitals of Flanders and court physician to the Duke of Orleans. Another famous drug from Brazil is the balsam of Cape V, or copaiba, the sap of Copaifra officinalis, a genus of the leguminous order of plants. It was described by Piso, is mentioned in Edward Cook's Voyage to the South Sea and Round the World, published in 1712, and first made its appearance in English gardens in 1774, having previously figured in Jacquin's Stirpium Americanarum Historia, 1763. Jaborandi, obtained from the dried leaflets of Pilocarpus pennitifolius, was described by Piso and Markgrave, like the two mentioned above. This drug was well known to the native tribes of Brazil and employed by the pages or medicine men. It received its first serious notice in recent times in the Diccionario de Medicina published by Dr. T. J. H. Langard in Rio de Janeiro in 1865. The plant reached English gardens 3 years later, but its properties do not seem to have been recognized in Europe until 1874, when a Brazilian scientist, Dr. Coutinho, sent some leaves to M. Rabuto, the eminent pharmacist of Paris, who tested it and declared it to be as valuable as quinine as a febrifuge and sudorific. Guarana, Paulinia sorbilis, Mart, is a tonic widely used in Brazil and Peru, which has recently been making its way into favor in Europe, France taking the drug readily. It is obtained from seeds, and a paste made which hardens into such a consistency that it can only be powdered by a grater. This powder is dissolved in cold water and taken as a tonic and digestive. One of Brazil's bottled mineral waters is also made with guarana added, and the pink-tinted, rather acrid drink is quite agreeable. The Brazilian interior, and particularly Amazonas, is so rich in medicinal herbs, seeds and roots, that it would take pages to give their names, and as they are not popularly known, the reader would not be greatly enlightened. But the Quassia amara, Linn., has international fame. Jalap, Piptostegia piscinis, is an old acquaintance. Many drugs have local names as the Lagrima venosa sengera, Terravau lady, a diuretic, the Melaoda sauncetano, S. cetanos melon, whose little fruit of the cucumber class is a medicine, whose stalks furnish a fine fiber, and whose leaves contain potash. There is at least one remarkable astringent, the Cipocabaclo, Davelia rugosa. Cambara is a much-used base for pectoral syrups. The batata de purga and the purga do pasta are used all over Brazil. Many of the rubiaceae are used as febrifuges. There are numbers of tonics, as the Laranjeira do mato, forest orange, and the pau parahyper and pau pereira. Andiaroba oil is used to make a skin soap, and also to light the family lamp in northerly states. The sapucana, Carpotroch brasiliensis, tree yields a nut containing 50% of oil used locally for rheumatism in Minas, Rio and Espirito Santo, and the Pinhão de Purga's seeds furnish an oil said to be convertible into gas. Besides the well-known vanilla, there is known one fine flavoring and scenting plant, the pau precioso, one of the Lauraceae. Its bark and seeds are sweetly perfumed and it is much used by local chemists. Brazil could if necessary ship excellent mineral waters abroad. There is an import of bottled waters into Brazil, but they have rivals in the national waters, chiefly found in Minas Gerais, and they're bottled by Brazilian companies. Perhaps the most popular are Caxambu and Salutaris, but there are others. The chief points of origin are at Aguas Virtuosas, Caxambu, Lamberi, Cambuquara, São Lourenço, and the recently opened wells at Araxá. Altogether, the natural gifts of Brazil in minerals and plants are such that not only does she supply the basis for many homemade remedies but also ships drugs abroad. Were her resources better investigated and quantities developed, she could greatly increase her position as a supplier of medicines to international markets. Chapter 8: Brazil's Exterior Commerce, studying the commerce of Brazil with the rest of the world, following the remarkable variations in amount of export of certain articles, and the no less remarkable fluctuation in price of others, one comes at last to the conclusion that Brazilian trade has never had a normal year. Almost every 12 months has seen changes taking place which are not the result, in most cases, of the growth to be expected along definite lines. Influences unforeseen have more than once knocked the bottom out of certain prosperous businesses. Production has been affected by remote causes, or stimulated by others as little to be normally reckoned upon. The history of Brazilian exterior commerce, which is largely the history of her exports since purchases depend upon income, shows some of the most sensational transferences of prosperity from one region and industry to another, oddest appearances and disappearances of industries, falls and rises of prices, in commercial records. To realize something of this, it is only necessary to think of the dominance of the northern promontory, In colonial days, when sugar was the great Brazilian staple together with dyewood, and of the total disappearance of the latter, until the last year, from consideration of the once feverish gold industry, which shipped over 1,000 tons of the refined metal in its heyday, employing an army of people, and which has now vanished, with the exception of the operations of 2 British-owned companies, of the obliteration of Brazil's fame as a diamond producer after the discovery of the blue clay deposits of Kimberley, of the rise of the once neglected and uncolonized South to the position of leader section of the country with its enormous coffee production, built up during the last 40 years, of the phenomena of the rubber export of the extreme north, as well as the new developments in Brazilian business appearing on the horizon, great in potentiality, during the war period, and which may bring Brazil into the front rank of countries exporting chilled beef and producing manganese ore. Few countries on the active list have seen such revolutions in industry. They have been largely due to the variety of Brazilian regions, and they will in all probability be repeated while Brazil opens her great expanses of virgin prairies, forests, and mineral-saturated hills. The following figures show that between 1915 and 1920, Brazil's exterior commerce was nearly equal in value to that of the previous 10 years. 10-year period total importation values, total exportation values, relation of imports to exports, average value of mill race in pence 1846 1855 737,720 contos 691,740 contos 106.6% 27 to the power of 1 1856 1865 1,228,171 1,225,563 100.2% 26 1866 1875 1,551,631 1,902,331 81.5% 21 1876 1885 1,768,564 1,969,515 89.8% 19 cubed to the power of 1 1886 1895 3,267,650 4,073,764 80.2% 18 cubed 1896 1905 4,856,634 7,324,066.3% 11 cubed 1906 1915 6,331,487 8,115,492 78% 14 cubed 1916 1920 21 6,063,000 7,397,381.5% 13 to the power of 1 to the power of 1. These figures show 1 or 2 points clearly. First, the vitality of Brazil, for as one industry has waned another has waxed, exportation values steadily showing increases in spite of the caprices of fortune. It is also plain that for the last 50 years Brazil has exported more than she has imported. In war years, this excess of exports was very much more accentuated, but, although this balance is useful in helping to steady exchange, to pay debts abroad, and to put money into shippers' and producers' pockets, it has the effect, when imports are greatly curtailed, of starving the federal government, whose revenues are mainly dependent upon import taxes. The famous 9 principal articles of Brazilian export were coffee, cotton, sugar, rubber, cacao, hides, of cattle, skins, of goats and sheep, tobacco, and mat, Paraguay tea, up to 1916. Other items which displayed marked rises up to 1918 were lard, rice, Brazil nuts, carnauba wax, manganese ore, precious and semi-precious stones, and chilled or frozen beef. Prosperity overall Brazil depends much more upon volume and variety of goods exported than upon prices, for while soaring values put large profits into the hands of the few, great volumes of products mean employment for the field laborer or collector, for transportation companies, and a host of intermediaries. In addition to increased prices, the actual volume of Brazilian exports was larger in the 5 years 1916–1920, rising from 7 million tons in 1911–1915 to nearly 10 million tons. This prosperity was due to war calls, several new items appearing on the 1916–20 lists on page 319. 1915, 1914, 1913, 1912, 1911 coffee 17,061,000, 11,270,000, 13,267,000, 12,080,000, 11,258,000 bags mat 75,885, 59,354, 65,415, 62,880, 61,834 tons rubber 35,165, 33,531, 36,232, 42,286, 36,547 sugar 59,074, 31,865, 367, 4,772, 36,208 cacao 44,980, 40,767, 29,759, 30,492, 34,994 hides 38,324, 31,442, 35,075, 36,255, 31,855, 2,032 Tobacco 27,096 26,980 29,388 24,706 18,489 Cotton 5,228 30,434 37,424 16,774 14,650 Skins 4,578 2,487 3,232 3,189 2,798 1920 1919 1918 1917 Coffee 11,525,000 12,963,000 7,433,000 10,606,000 13,039,000 Bags Mat 90,686 90,272,781 65,431 76,777 Metric Tons Rubber 22,876 32,213 22,211 31,590 28,865 Sugar 109,141 69,429 115,634 138,159 54,438 Cacao 54,419 62,584 41,865 55,622 43,720 Tobacco Leaf 30,562 42,575 29,011 25,282 21,021 Cotton Raw 24,696 12,153 2,594 5,941 1,071 Cotton Seed 23,564 22,649 42 22,882 11,762 Rice 134,554 28,423 27,916 44,639 1,315 Mandioca Flour 8,660 21,834 65,322 18,745 5,370 Beans 23,000 58,607 70,914 93,536 45,817 Brazil Nuts 9,279, 24,998, 6,750, 16,057, 9,882. Hardwoods 125,394, 103,824, 179,799, 64,264, 82,816. Manganese 453,737, 205,725, 393,388, 532,855, 503,130. Meat 63,654, 4,094, 60,509, 66,452, 33,661. Lard 11,166, 20,028, 13,270, 10,235. 3 hides 37,265, 56,788, 45,584, 39,912, 53,511. Tinned meat 1,649, 25,398, 17,223, 6,552, 856. Skins 3,966, 5,166, 2,215, 3,046, 3,840. The preponderance today of São Paulo as a producer state is shown by her shipment values. 465,212 contos out of the total exports, or about 4 to 6% of Brazilian sales. Next in values come the sales of Minas Gerais, worth 221,000 contos, and Rio de Janeiro state, with about 176,000 contos. Bahia is fourth, with exports worth over 102,000 contos. Para and Amazonas follow with about 70,000 and 64,000 contos respectively. Paraná, 33,565 contos. Espírito Santo, nearly 30,000, and Pernambuco, with 22,600 contos, are next, followed by Ceará, shipping nearly 19,000 contos worth of goods, to Rio Grande do Sul, with sales worth almost 16,000 contos, the only other state shipping over 10,000 contos worth of goods is Maranhão. The United States has been for many years the greatest single purchaser of Brazilian materials, generally taking rather more than 1/3 of all exports, Europe taking nearly all the rest, with South America also buying an appreciable share, amounting to about 5% of the total. The coffee trade is that in which the United States is most largely concerned. For the last 6 years, Brazilian exports of coffee have averaged over 14 million bags, and of this the United States has been taking about 1/3, Germany, Austria and the Netherlands accounting for another third, France taking from 1 to 2 million bags, and the rest of Europe absorbing the remainder. The United States, purchaser of $1 billion of tropical and subtropical products in 1915–16, is an eager taker of Brazilian hides and skins, an export markedly stimulated since the European War began. Important shipments coming from Rio Grande do Sul among other cattle states. She has, during the last 2 years, apparently been able to receive larger quantities of all Brazilian products, and perhaps the most salutary trend, for both the United States and Brazil, has been in the great quantities of raw materials taken by the northern country. These materials are the breath of life to the manufacturers, and nothing is better for Brazil than increased volumes of such exports. During 1915 the United States bought, reckoning in dollars, nearly $107 million of Brazil's total exports of over $255 million, while Great Britain took $31 million, France $29 million, Sweden $23 million, chiefly coffee, and, in view of the disappearance of direct sales to Germany, in all probability transferred to the Central Powers, and the Netherlands $16 million. Sales to the Argentine were nearly $13 million, while Uruguay took about $4.5 million worth of goods. Apparently, trading between Brazil and her South American neighbors on the same side of the Andes has been greatly increased during 1916, Argentina buying unprecedented amounts of sugar, as well as maintaining her imports of mate. During 1915, the total sales of Argentina to Brazil were worth over 89,000 contos, or something like $22 million, of which nearly $20 million were accounted for by wheat and wheat flour. At the same time Brazil sold to the Argentine 42,226 contos worth, say $10,560,000, of goods, of which nearly 70% was accounted for by mate sales, with 15% of tobacco. Brazilian imports show important changes in places of origin since the European War. Formerly Great Britain was by far the greatest seller to this country, supplying nearly a third of the total goods purchased. In 1911 the order in importance of countries selling to Brazil were Great Britain, Germany, the United States, France, Argentina, Portugal, Belgium. In 1912 and 1913 the same order was maintained, but with Germany increasing her sales at a greater rate than Great Britain, while the United States also showed gains. In 1914, with the outbreak of war, England still retained